In the book, Your Best Game Ever by Monte Cook and Shannon Germain, they have a quote that I really like that says, "The key to becoming a great GM more than anything else is an understanding of pacing." I think there's actually a lot of really important things that DMs need to do. And I'm not sure I can say that pacing is the most important, but it is certainly one of the most important traits we can have as DMs to make sure that our games are fun. I would say it's probably equally important with flexibility, creativity, and the ability to improvise, the ability to let the game go in different directions and be ready when it does. These are advanced skills for DMs. And having played with many DMs at many different circumstances, I can tell you that not all DMs have this trait. So it's an important one to keep in mind. And it's one I wanted to talk about today. This video, like all of the work of Sly Flourish, is brought to you by the patrons of Sly Flourish. You too can become a patron of Sly Flourish by going to patreon.com/SlyFlourish and joining up. So if you have become a patron, thank you very much for your support. There's another quote. I'm going to jump down to another quote that I read in the Kobold Guide to Plots and Campaigns by Wolfgang Bauer, where Wolfgang mentions that he has a friend named Janice who doesn't regularly play RPGs, and after having played them, referred to them as 15 minutes of greatness jam-packed into a 4-hour bag. I've played in games that felt exactly like that, where I've had one or two really interesting moments, and then the rest of the time, I felt like I was sitting back watching spreadsheets move. Pacing is a critical trait to make sure that a game is exciting, particularly when we're running like long. Think about how long a 3- and 4-hour game is. How many 4-hour movies have you sat through, right? That's a long time to be sitting in one place doing one thing. So we're going to talk about pacing today. When we think about pacing overall, I think it actually means a few things. There's a few different elements of pacing that we have in our game. How the game starts is a matter of pacing. Does it start with a lot of action, or is it a slow burn to start is a matter of pacing? It means keeping things focused on the action. It means always doing things. It means getting to what do you do as fast as you can. It means handing things to the players so that they can act on them quickly. If they're sitting back listening to a lot of stuff or hearing a lot about it and they're not doing anything about it, that's not great pacing. It means focusing the spotlight on the things that are important to the story, right? It means making sure that the goals are clear to the players and that the attention that you're applying matters to the story of the game. It means ensuring that all of the players have their proper light in that spotlight. It means making sure that everybody has a chance to be able to do something, show off their characters, and act as their character fits the story. It means staying focused on those goals, right? Getting rid of a lot of fluff and focusing down on goals. And it means oscillating between upward and downward beats. We're going to talk about upward and downward beats a little bit more. But this idea that both good things happen and bad things happen, and good things happen and bad things happen. You're oscillating up and down. Wonderful circumstances that are very helpful, followed by, oh my God, I can't believe we just stepped in it moments, right? You want to be continually going back. And that's definitely an element of pacing. And managing time and ending at the right place. This is a big one for one-shot games. You want to make sure that you know how to end your game, where to end your game, and how to prepare for the ending. Pacing matters for these games. I'll give some examples. So where does it go bad, right? Where can pacing really cause a problem? I brought up this quote, 15 minutes of greatness jam-packed into a 4-hour bag. But here's one circumstance where pacing can go bad. The game gets kind of slow, right? There's a slow moment in the game. It's kind of a lot of descriptions going on. Maybe some of the characters are involved doing some things, but like maybe 3 of the 5 characters really aren't involved in the scene. And a player tunes out. They pick up their phone. They open up a new tab in their browser window. They get distracted, right? So now they're distracted, and all of a sudden the game turns back again. And now they are involved. But now they come back in the game like, oh my God, I have no idea where we are, right? I totally got lost. And they can say like, can somebody just clue me? I tuned out. Can somebody clue me in? But how many times are you going to say that in a game before everyone's pissed off at you, right? So you don't say anything because you're embarrassed, right? And then you're trying to like, I'll just hang on and I'll figure out what's going on. But you have no idea what's going on. You don't even know what place you're in. So what happens? You tune out more. Right? And now you're really disengaged because you haven't done it. I know this because this happens to me as a player. I'm not a great player, and I tune out too easily, and then I get lost and I get embarrassed and I don't know how to get back in. And I'm not in this video, I'm not saying like that's the fault of the DM the whole time. I can do better as a player to stay paying attention. I can take notes. I can pay attention to the stories of other characters. There are things I can do as a player to stay better engaged. Make sure I don't open up a new tab window. Find a fidget spinner, something to keep my mind, available for the game, even if it's slowing down. On the other hand, on the GM side, there are things you can do to keep the pace up so that players don't have as much of an opportunity to be opening up new tabs. What are some practical things we can do to keep the pacing of our game moving strong? And I broke this up into 2 areas: general tips and tips specifically for pacing combat. So the general tips are: 1, start strong. Right, this is the 2nd step of the 8 steps of Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. For this very reason, you want your game to start off strong. Instead of having like a slow meandering start where everybody's kind of getting to know each other and you're meeting NPCs and the quest giver comes up and he's talking to you and you've got to negotiate with him and there's, a few checks, right? Like start out, I think about Ice Road Trackers, the latest D&D Adventures League adventure for the Rime of the Frost Maiden. It starts with you getting caught in an avalanche and a talking animal saying, "Quick, get in this cave or you're going to get killed." Right? That's a strong start. Getting jumped by bandits or goblins, strong start. Right? Looking up and seeing a volcano erupting that is going to destroy the town that you're in. That's a strong start. Get into the story. This in media res, right? Start. Think about every James Bond movie. James Bond doesn't start by walking into M and getting a mission and hitting on Moneypenny. It starts off with him like on top of a train, right? Like it starts with him getting shot by one of his own agents. Every one of them, right? Starts with him in a car chase, only to find out that the main villain is in the trunk of the car. Start in the middle, and if you can find like how do you start as close as you can to the action is really important. So start strong. Skip the boring parts, right? Look at the whole thing and ask yourself, like, is this scene part of this story? Is it fun? Is it interesting? If it's not, cut it, right? Just cut it. And if you're reading a published adventure and you see a scene and it doesn't resonate with you, cut it, move it out, right? Get to the parts that matter for the game. Work backwards from the ending. So this, again, is more focused on single session games, but it can really matter. If you are an Adventures League GM, I implore you to please listen to me on this one. Read the ending. Read what's supposed to happen at the end of this adventure, and then work from that backwards in your time and say, okay, if I know that I'm going to have so much time for this ending, what leads up to the ending? And then what parts can I cut? I think D&D Adventures League DMs feel like I have to run the adventure the way it's written. Guess what? You're not going to. No matter what, you're not going to. In all of the Adventures League adventures that I've played in, very rarely has a DM not been pressed for time at the end and ended up cutting stuff from the end of the adventure. Don't cut from the end. Cut from the middle. You're already going to cut stuff. You're not running it the way it's written. So instead of saying, I'm going to try to run it as written as much as possible, say, I want to run the parts that matter the most and focus on those and cut the parts that aren't helping with that. So this happened to me recently, right? Numerous times recently. DMs had to cut. Good DMs. People were working hard and they're good DMs, but they said, well, the adventure says you're going to have to go through this swamp and face a bunch of necrotic damage and figure out how to get through it and make a bunch of skill checks. And then they cut the ending. And it's like that part in the swamp didn't matter, right? It was just skill checks. Like, get us to the ending. Start at the ending and work backwards and then figure out your timing, right? Always keep an eye on the clock. Right? Monte Cook talks about this in Your Best Game Ever. Keep a timer in front of you. Look at it, right? If you're playing on a computer, you have that clock there. Look at the timer and say, okay, I've got an hour left. What have I got left to do in this hour? I've got, I'm 30 minutes in. Am I where I expected to be in 30 minutes or am I running late? And if I'm running late, what am I going to cut right now to get it back on time? Right? Always be looking at the clock. It's so easy to get lost. We're in flow, right? So one of the things about DMing, if we're into it, we're really into it. We're in that state of flow, right? I know when I DM, I'm in a state of flow. I'm losing track of time. All the cylinders in my head are firing off, right? I'm fully engaged. I'm doing something that is hard and complicated, but I'm really enjoying it. And when that happens, like playing basketball or running or lots of different activities that we do that are difficult, but we're good at, we enter that state of flow. And one of the characteristics of the state of flow is you lose track of time. And we can't afford to lose track of time when we're running a game. We need to know what the time is. We got to keep an eye on that clock. And we got to say to ourselves, what do I need to accomplish in the time I have left? And what am I going to cut in order to get there? Move the MacGuffin. So how do we change the timing, right? Well, if a game has certain objects that are required to get forward, you can move those around. A good example of this is Tomb of Annihilation. In the Tomb of the Nine Gods, in the Tomb of Annihilation, there are I think it's 5 skeleton keys, which are, they're very funny because the skeleton keys are actually skeletons with great big key heads. They are not in any particular room. You can apply them to a room, and I think there's recommendations that there might be a skeleton in a room, but you can move them wherever you want. The ability to move your MacGuffins means you get to change the pacing of the game. You can reduce the amount of MacGuffins. Maybe it doesn't need 5 anymore. It only needs 3. Right? And then it turns out they already have 2 and they only need 1 and there it is in the next room. So if you have these if you imagine a scenario where like there's a door and you need to get through the door to get to the final boss, and there's 3 keys to get in the door, and the 3 keys are in room A, B, C. You can move those keys. You can reduce those keys. You can get those keys so that they're already there. You can say you already bought 2 of the keys from an old vendor, right? You can't quite do that in the middle of a game. But there are ways for you to tune how long it's going to take to get through that session by moving MacGuffins around. Plan on like 45 to 75 minutes for your ending, depending on what the ending looks like. If the ending is a great big battle with a lot of stuff going on, it's going to be really hard. You probably want to plan more for like the hour and 15-minute time, right? And you want like 15 minutes to at least conclude the adventure. Like expect a long scene for that ending, and then work your way backwards on how much time you have left. So set a timer, right? If you're running a game and you're like, okay, I've got to get to the ending, set a timer on your phone that alerts you an hour and 15 minutes before the end of the game, and then change your pacing around to fit that hour and 15 minutes. It can work. Make sure all your scenes are important. We talked about this, right? Make sure your scenes are important. Clarify the goal, right? Make sure the goal is clear to the characters. Drop your important secrets and clues, right? Secrets and clues are there to help you maintain the pace of your game. They learn things, and they can learn them anywhere. Don't waste time with filler. When the pacing gets slow, or if you're like, oh my God, my alarm went off and I need to get them, that's the time to just open the spigot up and pour out your secrets and clues. Don't make them roll skill checks to figure them out. Tap into anything you can do to make sure that the vital secrets that are there to get them to the next stage of the game, make sure that those secrets and clues are in front of them and they have the information they need to move forward. If you're running a continuing game, if you're running a campaign, it's okay to end with a cliffhanger. If you're getting to the point where they just get into a fight, you don't need to finish the fight. You can actually start the fight and call the game and say, next session, we're going to be in the middle of that fight. A, it leaves a cliffhanger and everybody's very excited. And B, you've just created your strong start. You've capitalized next session on prep you don't have to do because you know you're starting a battle. I do this a lot and I like it. A disadvantage is what if a player can't make it and they're in the middle of a fight? You know, A, it sucks to be that player, but it would have sucked to be that player anyway because they're going to miss the game regardless. And what do you do when that character was in the middle of a fight? They just disappear. Like everybody knows. Everybody recognizes the fact the player's not there. Don't worry too much about, well, what about continuity? Just pull them out. It's okay. Rework and figure it out. Think like a movie editor. If you were editing a movie and you had a 4-hour movie in front of you, what would you be editing down to get it to 2 hours? What parts of this would you be removing to get it down to 2 hours? Do that during your game, right? Look at your campaign and say, or publish adventure if you're running a published adventure, right? What parts of this do you want to cut? And what parts can you cut? What if you had to cut it? Right? This is the AL part of it, the Adventurers League part of it. What do you have to cut to keep this thing down to 4 hours, right? You've got a duty to the players. How do you cut it down to get it to the right spot? Now let's talk about some combat pacing tips. I've already talked about how to make combat awesome in D&D in another video, so you probably want to check that one out because it's got a lot more tips. But I wanted to offer some specific tips when we're talking about pacing on how to keep the pace of combat. One of them is keep initiative visible. Right? Make sure that players know when their character is going. And part of that is you can call out who's on deck. Something else you can do is, if you're running in like Theater of the Mind, describe the circumstances between turns. So when you say like, Scipio, it's your turn. Right now you have 2 ogres that are on top of you, both wielding great clubs, and about 25 feet away from you is a hobgoblin mage who is getting ready to throw a fireball in the group. Right? Give them a circumstance about where they are right now and what choices they might have. You might have to do this more with some players than others, and that's okay. If you have players that you know get a little distracted, you probably want to start off by describing their current circumstance because you're going to have to do it anyway. For the other ones who've been paying attention, they might already be on top and know what they want to do, and you don't have to describe it for them. But be ready to kind of describe their current circumstances, and for some players, maybe offering some options. Like, well, you could fireball this group over here, or you could move over here and attack, but you might take an opportunity attack. Right? Offer some choices so they can say what they can do. This works well for new players. You don't want to tell them what to do. You want to give them some options and tell them they can also do whatever they want to do. Yeah, but that idea of describing things in between turns can matter. Use your monster dials. I've talked about the monster dials before that we have as GMs. We have a bunch of little dials that we can turn during the game to change the pace and to change the upward and downward beats. And they're really good. Monster hit points, right? We can change the number of hit points that a monster has, and we can do it dynamically, right? You probably want to start with the average. Some people like to start with the maximum, and then you can decide, like, is it just time for this monster to die? Have they been beating the hell out of it and it's really boring? Next hit kills it. Most of the time when you're tweaking monster hit points, you're tweaking down for pacing. Reduce the number of monsters. So before they even get into a battle, ask yourself, if this has to go quickly, I'm going to reduce it. A lot of times you'll be playing a published adventure and it'll say something like, there's 6 Sahuagins and 2 Sahuagin brutes and a Sahuagin baron are walking down the hallway. And you're like, man, they just fought a big pile of Sahuagin. Do we really want to have another great big fight against a bunch of Sahuagin? So instead, you can say there are 2 Sahuagins and get rid of everybody else. And that way, it's much faster, much easier, a much easier fight. And that's about changing pacing, right? That's about upward and downward beats. An upward beat is very few number of weak monsters. A downward beat is a big room full of heavy monsters. Know when to use those and be willing to tweak them during the game to change the pacing of the game. Increase damage. So if you reduce the hit points of a monster, and it's making things too threatening, or not, it's removing a lot of the challenge, increase the damage a little bit. Maybe they start getting multiple attacks if they only had one. Maybe they gain an extra attack. Maybe they have some elemental force kind of infuses their weapons and gives them extra damage on their attacks. Find ways to be able to tweak the damage that the monsters are doing. An in-game circumstantial one is really good. Like a witch doctor raises his hands and calls out, and all of the bodies start to wither and break away, i.e. their hit points just went down. But now they're all infused with necrotic energy. They know they're going to die, but they're going to pour all their life. And it's like, now they're all doing double damage, right? That's a really good, that's a really good way to go. So adding extra attacks, adding damage. So those are your 4 dials, right? Number of monsters, the hit points of the monsters, how much damage they do, how many attacks that they have. Good. Those are all dials you can tweak in order to change the pacing of combat while it's going on. Use static monster damage. For a lot of monsters, you can use their static damage and you'll have no repercussions. If you want to roll damage, roll for the important monsters. But if you have a lot of minions, just let the minions do static damage. Players will get to recognize, oh, wow, they do 8 damage every time they hit me. And I've had players say, like, wow, that sounds familiar. Like, I got hit for 12 damage. Huh, I got hit for 12 damage last turn. And it can get a little stale, I get it. But you don't have to roll for every monster, right? If you have a horde, let the horde do static damage. And if you have like 6 minions and a boss, the boss rolls, but the minions don't. Long battles are fine as long as they're interesting to everybody, as long as they're exciting, as long as it's towards the goal, as long as the players are learning things, as the environment is changing. What you want to hear, and I've heard this. I have a player who on occasion, he says, oh, it's my turn again. And God, it makes me feel good when I hear that. And it's because I know I'm keeping the pacing up so high in combat that this guy thought he had longer between turns to do whatever he was doing and didn't have it because the battle's going too quick. So that's what I really want. It's my turn again. That's a great thing to hear. Random encounters. So a lot of people are down on random encounters because they feel like filler, but random encounters don't have to be filler, especially if you apply secrets and clues to random encounters. Random encounters are an interesting way to learn about the world. They're an interesting opportunity for the players to be able to do things. Right? Combat is pretty high paced. They don't have to be hard encounters. They can be easy encounters. But they can learn stuff, and you can figure out, this is where like improvisation and creativity comes in. This is where you can figure out how to take the random encounter and make it part of the story, right? But a lot of times a good way to do that is learning a secret and clue, learning something while they're there. So those are some combat tips for pacing. There are a number of good books and articles that you can read to learn more about pacing. It is a topic worth diving into. This is an intermediate to advanced DM topic. It's something that you could spend the rest of your life working on. It's something that, in my experience, a lot of DMs don't really have a firm grasp on, probably including myself. So to me, it's a topic like improvisation. It's a topic we can always be working on and always getting better at. So a few of the books, there are 3 books. I do talk about this in my book, Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master, on chapter 24, has a whole chapter just about pacing. Hamlet's Hit Points by Robin Laws talks all about the upward and downward beats of pacing. Really, really good book. Your Best Game Ever by Monte Cook Games also has a whole section about pacing. And as you saw from the quote, Monte Cook definitely believes in pacing. The Kobold Guide to Plots and Campaigns has a couple of essays that talk about pacing and are worth talking about. And I've written about this topic at least twice on Sly Flourish, including Timing and Pacing Adventures, where I talk specifically about how to pace a published adventure that you're running, and a general topic on improving pacing. So I hope you found this video useful. I hope you will take some of these tips to heart and get out there and think about pacing your game, figure out how to keep the pace of your game high so that you and your friends can have an awesome time sharing tales of high adventure around your table. Thank you very much and have a great day.